So my name is Mitch Wallace. I'm currently a Forbes contributor covering the video game industry. I've also written about games for several different outlets like Wired, Tech Radar, Games Radar. Contributed to a couple cool kids books by Scholastic about video games. And then, sort of apropos to this interview, I sort of got my start in games writing about Croc for a UK print publication called Retro Gamer, and been writing about games ever since. So my gaming experience before I was a pro, and sort of how I got introduced to Croc. Well, I mean, I've been gaming since the Atari days. So mid to late '80s, introduced to the Atari 2600. After that, the NES, all those classics on the NES like Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Brothers. And I was just hooked from the get-go. Got my PlayStation in 1995, around launch. Funny story, I had actually rented a PlayStation from a local video game store with Mortal Kombat 3 and Battle Arena Toshinden. And it just felt like the future, the PlayStation. The N64 came out the following year in '96, and I think if you were a PlayStation owner in 1996, you were kind of like side eyeing that console because Super Mario 64 obviously launched with that machine, and there was nothing quite comparable on the Sony PlayStation to Super Mario 64. We had Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot obviously was a lot more linear. It wasn't free roaming like Super Mario 64. So I think that's where that PlayStation jealousy kind of crept in. Like we want something like Super Mario 64, but Crash Bandicoot is kind of like it. But then the gaming magazines started talking about Croc, early '97, I want to say it was, and it immediately caught my interest. And because I was just into 3D platformers, I loved sort of colorful, more family friendly stuff at the time, and Croc just looked like it just fit the bill. It was a cute character, colorful world, kind of pastel colors, and the kind of the key thing there was it was like more free roaming than Crash Bandicoot, and I was like, oh. That I'm interested in. It's like there's going to be more to this than Crash in a way. And yeah, and just sort of tracked it up until its release in, I want to say it was like September-ish '97, and got it on release day. This is my original Croc copy from back in the day. That also kind of coincides with the dual analog controller, which I actually have right here. The dual analog that I had, that I played Croc on back in '97, and this is the precursor to the DualShock, and it's kind of a rare controller at this point. It's got the concave analog sticks, it's got the longer like handles, some differences on the shoulder buttons too, and I was thrilled because Croc supported analog control, which up until that point PlayStation hadn't introduced. PlayStation, when it launched, was kind of the edgy game console. It was like you had like Wipeout and Loaded and more sort of mature angled games, whereas the N64 was right out of the gate with Super Mario 64. It did have that family friendly flair, and I think maybe even starting around the time of Croc, PlayStation was starting to get some of those, just games that had a friendlier aesthetic. Like, it wasn't so gritty, it wasn't so adult or grown up, and I think there was probably like a subset of PlayStation gamers like me who were sort of craving, I guess, some more of that innocent gaming that we had experienced on, say, the Super Nintendo or the NES. And Croc, I think, even though it was 3D, it was kind of a throwback to those days of like bright colors and just like a fun adventure that you would go on. It's not heavy, it's not serious. It's just, and there's a lot of good humor in Croc, with the Gobbos, potato. Um, and yeah, the music was incredible. Justin Charbona, I actually interviewed him for the Retro Gamer article I wrote, and that was definitely part of the draw for me as well. Because as soon as you drop into the first world, first level, um, there's just like this serene music that sort of envelops you in that space. And another kind of funny story, slightly embarrassing. Um, when I would play Croc, a lot of times I wouldn't actually play Croc. I would just like sit in the world and like make up my own game, like in my imagination. And and I would just spend, an hour just like running around the same level, like looking at rocks, listening to the music, being at peace. I was a strange kid. But it was sort of like, I was also kind of a lonely kid too, and Croc was one of those games that was sort of like a balm, or like it just made me feel good because it wasn't so heavy, it wasn't so serious. So yeah. What surprised me about sort of diving into the history of Croc? Um, well, first of all, it was just an honor talking to a lot of those guys because they made this game that I loved growing up, and it was. I think one of the things that surprised me was the sort of pioneering nature of that era of game development, especially in 3D games. It was like, even now if you go back and play Croc, it's you can feel the developers sort of like trying to figure out how 3D games are supposed to work. Um and actually this week I played Croc with the dual analog again, and was actually kind of surprised just all these years later, even after I did a lot of sort of the deep diving into Croc, that they actually got a lot of stuff right off the bat. Like, um, I know when you control Croc digitally, it's more of the tank controls, like sort of Tomb Raider style. And I also know, talking to Nick Cussworth, the lead designer, he said that they got the dual analog like really late in development.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't thrilled about that, and he didn't think the implementation was up to his standards. But using it again, even last night, like, you move the camera with the right stick. Croc has some nuanced degrees of movement with the left stick. Like, they got the elements in there. It's like it's it wasn't as polished as say like a Mario 64, which that was like some black magic or something. I'm not sure what. Yeah, so that was surprising. Just you know that they did get so much right, start out of the gate, having to figure stuff out themselves. There weren't examples to look at. It's like, I think back to more PlayStation history. It's like, no, Spyro the Dragon wouldn't come along until like a year later in '98. That was, more perfected the 3D formula, or like Gex Enter the Gecko, or there was sort of more of like a tidal wave of stuff that could tweak those base elements that came along in within Croc. Um, and I think the other thing that surprised me when I was talking to a lot of those guys was just the passion they had for that project. Whether it was the art or the coding or the designing, they really cared about that game, and that I find that era of game development just fascinating in general because it was smaller teams. It feels like there was a lot more passion. People were closer to the projects. It wasn't teams of 300 people. I won't name any studios, but um, yeah. So I find that era very inspiring, charming, um, uh, and it's no surprise that something like Croc came out of that sort of soup. Yeah, sort of that naivete and that sort of scrappiness. Like, there's a magic to that, with anything creative. Like, if you're just sort of pushing through the fog or the mist and just like mapping new terrain as you go, like, yeah, there's a something special about that, I think. The music is incredible. The score, the Justin Charvona's soundtrack um, was a huge reason why I just like to just sort of stick around and explore Croc's world. Um, and he used some really unconventional like instruments in the soundtrack. Like it's very like trumpet heavy. He said that he used theremin, in a lot of like the spookier segments, like the underground levels. Um, there was like clarinet or oboe. I was never sure exactly which one it was, in sort of the more serene levels. So yeah, unconventional soundtrack, but definitely helped give Croc its own identity. How did I sort of find out that Croc might be coming back? Um, I don't know. I mean, obviously there was the sort of cryptic tweet from Jazz San. That was, the more like the official tip off. But I feel like for years there's just been, the rumor mill is always churning, and it's always like, I don't know if it was more of a rumor as more of like there was like a growing surge of people who wanted Croc to come back. Like everyone who grew up with Croc kind of looked around at some point and was like, okay, well, Crash got a remaster, Spyro got remastered. Well, we like this game too. We loved Croc. So like I think it was more of like a groundswell of just people just sort of demanding that something be done with the franchise, whether like a new Croc come out or they remastered the first two. So I think by the time I saw Jez's tweet, it almost felt like it had been confirmed already. It was like, oh, like I knew this was happening, but now Jez said it's happening, so it's for sure happening. Um, and I think after talking to the guys in 2016, like Nick and Jez and all them, like I knew there was some desire there to bring it back. I think even when I spoke to Jez in 2016, he was throwing around the idea of like maybe bringing it back. I can't quite remember; it's been a while, but yeah. How will new kids come to Croc? I almost made a new kids on the block joke, but I could have rhymed it too. The standards for gaming have changed so drastically. If you're a young person who's heavy into gaming now, you're now viewing Croc through. I mean, even if you've played the Spyro and Crash remasters slash remakes, those were retooled in pretty serious ways to accommodate a modern audience. Um, so I think a lot of young people will come to it interested. Will people be viewing the Croc remaster through sort of nostalgia glasses, even with like updated visuals, sort of thing? I don't know. That's always a tough one when old games get remastered. That's always sort of at the forefront of the discourse, because it's like, um, when you play a game, an older game that's been remastered, you can feel that it's dated in some ways, because it's from a particular era, it's from a particular time period, particular sort of uh, sort of design philosophies of that whatever decade that was. Um, do I think that people will still appreciate it? I think absolutely. I think as a sort of like historical piece, people will definitely appreciate it. As a nostalgia piece, yes. And I think they'll still be able to enjoy it because back in 1997, when I got my shiny new dual analog, it was like everything was new. This was all novel. It was like I didn't have any standards by which to judge Croc other than like this is the first sort of truly 3D game on the PlayStation that I can roam around in and explore. So it was like it doesn't matter if these controls are kind of janky. They were the best we had. And now I just sound like old man screaming at clouds. But